celebrating 10 years of possibility. Pilot Flying J and Halloran Hilton Hill present Anything is Possible. Today's guest, Becky Duncan Massey.
Celebrating 10 years of possibility. I'm Halloran Hilton Hill. This is Anything is Possible, and this is Senator Becky Duncan Massey. Senator, if your father were alive today and he heard Senator Massey, what would he say?
Well, he would tell me first that I was no better than anybody else, so just get out there and get back to work, and not to get tied up in titles. But he would be proud of me, but he was still more into, you're one of everybody else, so you need to work hard.
Welcome to the broadcast, and congratulations.
Thank
and
you.
I'm glad you're here with me this year, and I can't wait to explore your story of possibility. But I want to go back to, I came to visit you in Nashville, came into your office, and I saw this picture in your office.
Mm-hmm.
Describe that for the people watching.
Well, it's a portrait of my dad, a picture of my dad, and you know, I really feel like that, you know, I was the baby in my family and a daddy's girl, right. But he shaped my life as far, well, all my family did, but Daddy especially, just that life of service and life of, you know, he was the most humble person I ever knew, and figured, you know, when you're down in Nashville, you do get caught up in all the senator stuff, and you know, I go back in my office and he's looking over my shoulder. I tell everybody he's making sure I behave myself, but keeping things real and what it's all about.
Tell us about your dad. For people who don't know your father, what was his name? Where was he from? How was he raised?
John J. Duncan, and he didn't really become senior until he passed away. But it was John J. Duncan. He was from Scott County up in Helenwood, which was really between Huntsville and Oneida.
Now, isn't that the same area that Howard Baker's from?
Howard was from Huntsville. Daddy, basically they say Helenwood was about where the resume speed sign is. So he grew up one of 10 children. His dad was a country farmer and preacher, and they had very, very humble background. The only way Daddy got to go to college was he wrote an essay for Sears and won a $200 scholarship to UT and got to come up to Knoxville, and there began his career.
How did he get into public life?
He, when he was at UT, he was, then he went into the service and was down in Dothan, Alabama, stationed down there. And then after he got out of the service, he went to Cumberland Law School in Lebanon. And I think just came to Knoxville and started practicing law. His brother, Joe Duncan, went in practice with him. And he got real involved in the American Legion, and then from there ran for mayor in 1959 when I was 4 years old.
All right, so you're 4 years old and your dad runs for mayor. Did he ever talk to you about what pressed him into public service? Because both he and his brother ended up as public servants, and a large number of people in your family have been committed to public service. What drove them to do that?
Being able to help people. You know, his mother was a school teacher and helped others, and he really, and growing up in a Presbyterian church in Scott County, that you did what you could to help other people. And up in Scott County, you really had to work together because it was a very poor community. One time their house was kind of picked up and destroyed through a tornado, and these folks there that really had no money would come by and they started dropping coins into a little tin to help them rebuild their house. And I think that just etched in his mind that you're there to do what you can, that, you know, God gave you skills and you're supposed to use them the best you can.
Wow, when you think about people who come from communities like that, there's a community imperative to serve. I think my father was raised during the Great Depression, and I tell people all the time, he always believed we should leave an extra plate at the table. And I knew we were going to gather up people after church that didn't have anywhere to eat. That was just understood. You were to help people.
Right.
It sounds like your father comes from that same type of community where there's a community imperative to serve, and that's how you root yourself in being a good person.
Right.
So you're 4 years old when he decides to run for mayor of Knoxville. You're the youngest in the family. Did they have a role for a 4-year-old to play in a political campaign? Now, typically, 4-year-old is the cute little daughter. The only thing you have to do is just be cute.
Cute. Well, I mean, I would go out and ask people to vote for my dad.
You remember this at 4?
And I remember election night because I ended up spending the night with Caroline and Red Miller. And Caroline was John Cullum's sister, just passed away this past year. But they didn't think I was quite old enough to stay up late with the rest of the family, and I was a little indignant about that because I wanted to be and do everything that my big brothers and my big sister did. And I liked to be right in the middle of it and didn't like to be left out at all.
So as you're growing up, you're watching your dad run for office. What do you remember him saying? Do you remember him having words to live by, phrases that he lived by? Do you remember picking that stuff up at a very early age?
I think it really is the humbleness that came there and the ability to work hard and do what you can. I mean, we weren't supposed to sit around. We weren't expecting anybody to wait on us. If something needed to be done, we were told that we needed to do it. And as a result, and we watched him. He would go out and do things for other people. As you said, the extra seat at the table, we were always having somebody over or he was doing something for somebody. And it was just that lifelong service, that example. You asked what other role I had as a real youngster. When we'd go to gatherings and Mother and the other 3 were back in the car ready to leave, it was my job to go tag on my dad's coattails to get him out of a place because he'd be busy talking to everybody, and I could get away with it.
You could get away with it. My guest today on Anything Is Possible is Senator Becky Massey. More of her story on Anything Is Possible next.
Possibility powered by Pilot Flying J, Covenant Health, Home Federal, and the Knoxville News Sentinel. Coming up,
I decided that if it was ever in God's plan and if the timing and everything worked out, the legislature was the only thing I was ever interested in.
Welcome back to Anything Is Possible. My guest today is Becky Duncan Massey. She's a senator now. And we were just talking during the break, I guess about a year ago, based on the time of this taping, you weren't even thinking about running for senator.
Correct. I mean, it was not on the radar. Jamie was still our state senator, Jamie Woodson, and it just wasn't in the thought process at that point.
What was the deciding factor? I mean, what happened where you said, it's time to do this? Because you found really incredible ways to serve, and I want to talk about your family and what you guys have done. And in fact, she and her husband have come up with this innovative way to process auctions for charities, and she was telling me that they've done you guys helped to process about $2 million a year. That's a whole other story.
Right.
So you were with the Sertoma Center. You guys were doing all this charity work. So you found a way to live out that community service imperative that was bequeathed to you by your father. You get it by DNA, and you got it by your father saying, stay humble, serve. But up to this point, you haven't run for any office. What was it that made you go, now's the time, and this is the office?
Well, I mean, I've had folks talk to me, you know, a lot over the years and say, are you ever going to run for anything? And there just really wasn't an interest. Well, about the time Ben actually resigned from the Senate, a couple people talked to me about running for the Senate then, and that's probably when the seed maybe was first planted, but it wasn't the right time for my work at Sertoma. It wasn't the right time for my work in my personal life, and I didn't feel like that I was ready for something like that. And then, but just over the years through my work with Sertoma, and we, you know, serve adults with intellectual disabilities, but I've been real involved in our statewide association of providers and been going down to Nashville for 18 years now. And a few years ago, I guess I decided that if it was ever in God's plan and if the timing and everything worked out, the legislature was the only thing I was ever interested in. But if it didn't work out, I was very content doing what I was doing, and it wasn't like I was going to be incomplete if I didn't run. But it just kind of had reached that level. And so it was about mid-April last year when Jamie announced she was resigning, and we talked to, my husband Morton and I talked, and we talked to a lot of different folks, and we had about 2 weeks to decide, and we had to get into it and make the decision quick. And we decided it was just the right time and the right job, and that I was definitely qualified for it, so we said, let's go for it.
I'm always interested to know what is the sure sign for people. Like, if I pray and ask God, is this your will for me to do this? Where do you get the thumbs up?
Well, I think it's a feeling, but I really do think God was kind of laying out the path and kind of work.
So the path is an affirmation.
The path was kind of already in motion. And it really just felt like the right thing to do. And, but I mean, it's just, after we got into it, I'm sitting there going, now, when did I decide this?
Right. So
you second guess a little bit.
God decided and put you in the stream.
I think it put me in the stream, and the doors were open. It's just like when I started at Sertoma 18 years ago. I had not worked with the disabled. I was a stay-at-home mom. And I was looking to go to work full-time when my youngest daughter was starting middle school. Kristen was starting middle school, and ran into our former director just by accident and started out doing their public relations and fundraising, and then about 14 years ago became the executive director. So it was just, I think, I've seen God work in my life and open doors for me, and I think when those doors are open, you've got to be willing to go through them.
If we take the wide angle macro in your life, congressman's daughter, 4 years old, watches her father rise to power, inherits by DNA and by name almost a birthright to public service, gets to the right strategic inflection point in her life, an office opens up, she steps right in. Next stop, U.S. Senate, and then on to heaven. It would make me think that you didn't have to believe, or that you never had anything tough to overcome or deal with in your life. And one of the things that I love kind of sussing out and learning on this show is, how do people make it over the tough times in their life? So what I'd love for you to consider is, we'll take a break. When we come back in just a second, what I'd like to talk about is, what's the toughest thing you had to overcome in order to become? Because I truly believe that most people that accomplish something great, they start with faith. They typically run into, at least in a decade of doing this show, I haven't run into a person yet that hasn't run into something that they had to climb over, or something that they had to go under, or something that they had to go around, or something that they had to go through in order to make it. And I wonder if maybe you just have a charmed, Disney-esque life, or maybe you've had to push through some things, which is true. So you think about that, and we'll talk about it in just a second. You're watching Anything is Possible. These are possibility engineers, people who prove with their lives that anything is possible. The rest of the story when we come back.
Coming up.
And there was all these limos that would drive up to the White House, and here comes Daddy in his little white Maverick, and he was really proud of that Maverick.
I have to say that I love my job. This is Anything is Possible. These are great stories about great people who prove with their lives that anything is possible. I call them possibility engineers, and we're celebrating a decade of doing this work, and I'm pleased as punch to have Senator Becky Duncan Massey with me today. I have, Becky, I love this work because I learned so much.
Right.
I've learned more, though, from people's struggles than I have from their success.
Right.
Right. And so I really do believe that possibility is really about perspective and being able to push through the tough stuff of life to get to the contribution that you were set here to make.
Right.
Right? And so I haven't run across a person yet that has been able to accomplish anything of significance without going through a certain amount of struggle. What's your story?
There's been family members that have gone through some major tough times, and you walk it with them, and it really does put a perspective on life that God is in control and that you do have to have faith to get through things. So, I mean, my girls have struggled with certain things in life, and you know, some of my siblings and things, and so it's just really, really hard. But also, you know, it's just through being at Sertoma and walking it with the folks with disabilities and their families and seeing what they go through, it makes you appreciate the little things. And I've never been one, people tell me I'm usually one with the glass half full than the glass half empty, because I've seen so many folks with so many difficulties in life that I just try to appreciate what I have.
What did you learn from working with people at the Sertoma Center?
Just to appreciate what you have, and that you can be happy. You don't have to have the world. I know when I first started there, you know, Morton used to have trouble getting a Christmas lift out of me because the folks there, a lot of them, 2/3 of the folks in our residential program either have no families or they're from very indigent family, and they would be tickled with, you know, a UT baseball cap for Christmas. And it just kind of put things in perspective that, you know, I am lucky. I'm healthy. I've got a great family. We live within 10 minutes of 90% of both Mortons in my family. I did lose my dad when I was 33 years old. But other than that, my family's all been relatively healthy, and I've just been blessed.
Tell me about your mom.
Mother was from Iowa. Came down here to her sister, her brother-in-law actually was working at the Manhattan Project. And she came down here to live with her sister and brother-in-law for a while and met Daddy at a YWCA dance. And she was kind of the practical, no-nonsense, you know, that Iowa farm girl. I feel like I got my common sense from Mother and my mischievous from my dad. But she kind of kept everything rolling, was the constant. When Daddy was coming in and out, she made sure we had breakfast and dinner, and that we were, you know, doing what we needed to do. You couldn't fuss if you were getting a shot, or if you're sick, you just went and did it. You
seem like a pretty tough lady. You seem like you've got a coat of Teflon. Like you just kind of push through things. And I notice you've referenced your parents, your experience. But then when you talked about losing your dad in your 30s, your eyes kind of dimmed just a little bit, like the wattage went down, and then you brought it back up. When you lost your dad, what did you lose? I was a daddy's girl. What is a daddy's girl? What does that mean?
I just felt like I was very special to him. And about anything he asked me to do, I would try to do it for him, and I didn't want to let him down. And he showed me that you can be busy, you can have a chaotic life, as a political life always is, but that you take time for your family and those you love.
You told me a story about not being able to be with him at a significant moment, and that he came back, and you remember telling me a story about taking the picture, and you ended up was it in the paper?
When
your dad was elected to Congress?
No, that was when he was elected mayor.
Oh, okay, so you didn't get to be in a picture or something. Tell me that story.
When I was 4 years old, it was election night, and I told you they sent me to the Miller's house, and they came the next morning and took the family picture, and Joe and Jimmy and Beverly, they were all in their pajamas, and they said Becky was away visiting friends. Well, I really was away visiting Mother and Daddy's friends, not my friends, but I was 4 years old and a little upset by that, and so Daddy called the paper back and asked him if they'd come out and get a picture of me and him, and that picture's just very special to me.
That's big. I want to do this before you get away. I want you to tell me what your dad taught you, his rules of the road. Teach me what he taught you about success and possibility and service.
Well, I think you become successful by what you do. It's, you know, that's where you build a life of significance. And just watching my dad, it wasn't so much what he said as much as what he did. He led by example. And it was really that life of service. You know, I remember when he was mayor and we'd go around and take Christmas turkeys to people on Christmas Day. You know, you were always doing something for somebody else. And, you know, even in his last years, he was ranking Republican on the Ways and Means, and he was going and meeting with President Reagan once a week. And there was all these limos that would drive up to the White House, and here comes Daddy in his little white Maverick. And he was really proud of that Maverick. So it was, he cared for people, and it didn't matter whether they were rich or they were poor or who they were. He wanted to be their friend. He was not Congressman Duncan. He was John. And that's why, you know, you say Senator, but I'm Becky, and I'll always be Becky. And it's just that example of doing what you can to make somebody else's life a little better. And if you're in a position to help somebody, you need to try to do it. And you're not anybody special. You're just a God's creature, just like you and everybody else is, and you do what you can to help.
You want to go back to Washington?
Maybe for a visit, but no, I'm very content being in Nashville. It's an amazing experience. It's a good group of folks to work with, and you know, sometimes I have to pinch myself. I don't believe that I'm finally doing this, but I feel like that I bring a perspective. There's really no other social service provider in Nashville. And, you know, I really try to do my best, especially for the most vulnerable population, the people that don't have a voice. And if I can bring that perspective there, I've done a good job.
You know, it just dawned on me just in the middle of this conversation that when people pick up the phone and they called your dad when he was mayor or congressman, or they call your brother who's a congressman now, or they pick up the phone and call you in Nashville, what they really hope is that something is possible.
Right.
And that you, through your public service, are a conduit of possibility. Mm-hmm. So for a lot of people, you do make anything possible. So, Becky, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Daddy's girl. We'll see you next time on Anything is Possible.